Alright, where to start? This is going to be a long one. From a young age, I've always been into video games. My earliest memories of gaming were playing a game called Putt Putt Goes to the Moon on my dad's computer. I can't remember my exact age back then, but it was a long time ago. My family moved to Paris when I was 6 years old. When we returned to Aberdeen to visit the wider family, I remember playing a lot of Doom on my uncle's computer. Certainly a slightly different game than Putt Putt Goes to the Moon. I was 7 when I got a PlayStation for Christmas. I had asked Santa for rollerblades instead, because back then I actually used to spend a lot of time outside. I think my dad got me the PlayStation partly because he also wanted to play it though, as he got himself a copy of the game Alien. I still remember the face huggers that would jump on you to this day from that game. My dad didn't end up playing it that much, and never really got into gaming after that. Anyway, I have a lot of fond memories of playing Crash Bandicoot on that PlayStation. Alongside this, I've been playing some of the original Warcraft at my neighbour's house, an American family, and I just remember building a lot of paths and walls. I got myself Warcraft 2 on my dad's PC shortly after, and instantly fell in love with the game and the genre of RTS. I left France in 1998, shortly after the Football World Cup. It was actually the last time that Scotland was in the World Cup until this day. It was being held in France too, so we had a lot of family over, and I remember it being a really exciting time. A few months before that, StarCraft had just been released, and I had spent a lot of time at my friend's house, in his basement, where his dad had around 10 different PCs set up, his very own LAN. He was big into flight simulators, and he had a ton of tech. I played a lot of StarCraft back then in that basement. When we returned to Scotland over the next 5 years, I continued to play a ton of RTS games, from Age of Empires to Empire Earth to Warrior Kings to Age of Mythology and Warcraft 3. I was in Portugal on a family holiday visiting my aunt, uncle, and cousins when Warcraft 3 was released. Me and my cousin managed to convince our parents to take us into the nearest city, and we both bought the game in Portuguese. We were excited to get home and play it ASAP. My uncle had a good PC, and I ended up spending a good part of that holiday sitting indoors playing through the campaign with my cousin, despite the glorious weather and swimming pool outside. Until World of Warcraft, there wasn't a game I played more than Warcraft 3. And the subsequent Frozen Throne expansion. I loved the game, the story, and the competitive element of the online play. I remember the terrible 56k dial-up internet connection when trying to play with friends online. It was a real struggle back then. You couldn't use the phone while someone was on the internet. It was slow and there were disconnects. When broadband finally came around, and it took a while in the UK, it was a blessing. It makes me think how much has improved with internet access since not so long ago. I have a ton of fond memories from the Warcraft 3 days. The custom games, the ladder, and the competitive system. The Battle.net chat rooms. Downloading and watching replays trying to always get better. I don't think there's been a better strategy game. I still find myself watching Grubby every now and then, on YouTube to this very day. Close to the release of World of Warcraft, I really started getting into Dota as well. I remember when I first heard about World of Warcraft, I imagined it as being a bigger version of Dota, where you controlled one hero in a large world. It would be my first ever MMO experience. I pre-ordered the collector's edition of the game and waited with a lot of anticipation for the release. I managed to get into the US beta of World of Warcraft, and I made an undead rogue as my first ever character. I can't remember what level I managed to get to, but I don't think I made it out of the Barrens. Later in the beta, I also made a human paladin to resemble Arthas as close as possible, with the long blonde human hair. The game was amazing. I had never played anything like it, and I instantly fell in love. With the release of the actual game coming up in Europe, I told my IRL friend that I wanted to play a class with more responsibility in groups. I must have had some bad experiences in the Wailing Caverns on the beta. I told my friend I wanted to play either a healer or a tank. My friend wanted to play healer, which left me with a tank option, and the rest is history. Sometimes I wonder how different things would be if I had chosen to play the healer instead. Perhaps my entire life path would be different. I was 16 years old when the game finally got released in 2005, and myself and a couple of friends rolled onto the server Skull Crusher. I played a Mighty Torn Warrior. I played a lot more than my friends did, and quickly found myself at level 60, leading groups through the various dungeons at the time, Skullomance, Stratholme, and Blackrock Spire. I became somewhat established and well connected on the server group-wise. I got the full Valor set, and finally set foot in Molten Core. I will never forget those first 2 giants with the bridge in Molten Core. What a raid. I had only killed Lucifron when my IRL friends decided they wanted to change things up and make new characters on a new server, and as a new faction. This time we would play Alliance on a server that just came up, Sylvanas. I made an Alliance Night Elf Hunter called Candy, and again we tried somewhat to level up together. We made a guild together, with me as the guild master, called Naked. While leveling up, I would meet 2 of our main starting members in the guild. First I met Splinky, a Night Elf Hunter with a long white ponytail. Strangely, I can still remember exactly how his character looked. I met him in the wetlands while questing, around about level 20 to 30, and after playing for a bit together, he joined the guild. Next up was a druid called Javak, who also joined. Myself, Splinky, and Javak were the first level 60s in the guild, and from there we would do a lot of the endgame pre-raid content together. I remember killing a very different looking Nathanos Blightcaller in Eastern Plaguelands, with a contingent of many different guilds, for example. I was really into the game back then. I was immersed in the world, keen to explore it, to live it. Outdoor PvP was a big feature. Hillsbrad Foothills, Tarnmill vs South Shore. We would make big groups from the guild, still called Naked at this point, of all different levels of players. We treated it as a real territory battle. We really got into it. There was no way we were going to let the Horde occupy a South Shore. These PvP raids were a ton of fun, and really added a value and a reason for people to want to be in the guild. As more people in the guild got to level 60, we started doing a lot of dungeons together, and soon we were a decent collective of level 60 players. As the guild started doing more and becoming more, I decided to rename it from Naked, which had always been somewhat of a joke name for lack of a better idea at the time, to Method. The definition of the word made sense for World of Warcraft, and for a raid guild. Method, which means a procedure, technique, or way of doing something, especially in accordance with a definitive plan. It sounded good when it was said out loud, and interestingly, our team support hashtag would later be established as #MethodWay. It was also at this point that I started missing my warrior, and I felt like I could lead and influence the success of the dungeons and later raids much more as a tank rather than a DPS, and so I started leveling my human warrior Skull on the side. Having been level 60 twice at this point, and experienced a lot of the content the game had to offer, the next step was to turn the guild's attention towards raiding. I decided early on that I wanted to make Method renowned on the server, and when it came to raiding, I wanted Method to be the best guild on the server, the guild that was killing bosses before anyone else. There wasn't really a world stage at this point, or even a European stage. Every server was its own massive community, and there was only the community you really thought about. We didn't have enough players at level 60 to do our own 40-man raids. I began trying to recruit players whenever I could. Firstly, those that I had good experience with from the dungeons. I remember whispering players, telling them that Method would be the best guild in the server, that I was committed to making it happen, and trying to convince them to join, that we were the best choice. Recruitment went well. We did pick up some great players, many of whom would play with Method for years to come. However, at the time, we still didn't have enough to make a 40-man raid ourselves. I had become friendly with an officer in another big guild at the time. His name was Spricer, a human warrior. Again, writing this, I can still fully remember what his character looked like. I feel back then that there was much more feeling of fantasy, that the people were the character themselves, which is something very detached now. Anyway, he was the officer of a guild called Might, and in the absence of the guild master who had gone MIA, he had now taken the reins. Method and Might came together to make a 40-man raid team between us, and it stayed like this for a short while. The raids were commonly referred to as M&M, like the chocolate. The guildmaster of Might never ended up coming back to the game anytime soon, and Spricer, not wanting to take on the responsibility of guildmaster, agreed to merge Might under Method to become one unified guild. From there, Method went on to conquer Molten Core and Elixir, and establish ourselves as the pinnacle of Alliance raiding on Sylvanas. I have so many memories from these times that I will always look back on fondly. The running of 40 mounted players towards Elixir's lair, it felt epic. It felt like you were a massive army on the move. Like I said, I was really into the game back then. I remember while we progressed Molten Core, I would go home at lunchtime from school with my friend, and we'd watch videos like Nightmare Asylum vs Major Domo and Ragnaros from the viewer point of view. The music was always interesting too. And finally, I remember skipping my secondary school dance, otherwise known as prom for the US guys, to kill Ragnaros for the first time. The server first time. And then there was also the DKP system, the discussions of who was going to get the first bindings of the Windseeker. Those were the days. At some point during vanilla, a thread popped up on the official raids and dungeon forums that was used to track which guild killed which boss first on a European and world level, a step much further than server level. Having established herself as the best guild in the server, this was the new objective for Method, to achieve the best possible rank on a European and world level. If I remember correctly, this started becoming quite prominent around AQ40 and then later Naxxramas. Talking about AQ40, it was around this period that I spent multiple months grinding Arathi Basin and Warsun Gulch until I finally got rank 14 in PvP. This was a pretty big achievement on a personal level since I was still going to school back then, full time. Due to grinding for rank 14, we decided as a guild that the Officer Splinky would be the one to bang the gong and open the gates of AQ. If only I knew that I would still be playing World of Warcraft 15 years later, and that the Scarab Lord became quite prestigious as a title. I remember that we were going to bang the gong early in the day to avoid massive server lag. Everyone would gather for it. However, we, and the entire server, had to wait until myself and another officer at the time, who was an IRL friend, to come home from school to take part. I can proudly say that I never did skip a day of school to play World of Warcraft. During our Naxxramas progress, I had finished school and it was time to go to university. This was a big problem because the university was in a different city, 2 hours away, and the student halls had no internet connection. I made it a priority to get an internet connection installed, although some drunk guy literally pulled the cable out of the wall at some point from outside. It took a while, and it wasn't the easiest of times to raid. I would travel home each weekend to raid, and I seem to remember this was around the time of the Four Horsemen, where every tank was desperately needed. We eventually cleared out the entire raid, not really placing high up on the European or world rankings. Still server first, however. For only raiding on the weekend and during the nighttime, it wasn't too bad. Method would actually not move to daytime raiding until long after this. With Kel'Thuzad down, I finally got my hands on Might of Menethil, the best two-hand weapon in the game, and soon afterwards I made my one and only PvP movie, Sko and His Mom. Shortly after, it was time to get ready for the highly anticipated release of World of Warcraft's first expansion, the Burning Crusade.